The Vietnam War stands as one of the most complex and controversial chapters in American history. It was a conflict that spanned nearly 2 decades, drawing the United States into a struggle far from its own shores, with consequences that would echo for generations. Understanding America's involvement in Vietnam requires a look at both the global context of the Cold War and the deeply personal stories of those who lived through it. In the aftermath of World War II, the world was divided between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Each sought to expand its influence, and nowhere was this more evident than in Southeast Asia. Vietnam, once a French colony, found itself at the center of this ideological battle. After the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, Vietnam was temporarily divided at the 17th parallel. The Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh, and the anti-communist South, backed by the United States and its allies. America's initial involvement was limited. Advisors, funding, and military equipment were sent to support the South Vietnamese government. But as the communist insurgency, known as the Viet Cong, gained strength, American commitment deepened. The prevailing belief among U.S. leaders was the domino theory, the idea that if Vietnam fell to communism, neighboring countries would soon follow. This fear drove policymakers to escalate America's role. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident marked a turning point. Reports of attacks on U.S. naval vessels led Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to increase U.S. military presence. What began as a limited advisory mission quickly transformed into a full-scale war. By 1968, more than 500,000 American troops were stationed in Vietnam. The war itself was unlike any conflict the United States had faced before. Dense jungles, unfamiliar terrain, and a determined enemy who used guerrilla tactics made progress difficult. American soldiers faced not only physical dangers, but also the psychological toll of a war with no clear front lines and no easy victories. The enemy was elusive, often indistinguishable from the local population, and willing to fight a protracted, costly war. Back home, the war sparked intense debate and division. As casualties mounted and images of the conflict were broadcast into living rooms across America, public support began to erode. Massive protests erupted on college campuses and in city streets as citizens questioned the purpose and morality of the war. The draft, which compelled young men to serve, became a focal point of dissent. The Tet Offensive in 1968, a massive series of attacks by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces, further shifted public opinion. Although militarily repelled, the offensive shattered the perception that victory was near. Confidence in government statements waned, and calls for withdrawal grew louder. Over the next several years, U.S. involvement gradually decreased. President Richard Nixon implemented a policy known as Vietnamization, aiming to transfer combat responsibilities to South Vietnamese forces while gradually withdrawing American troops. Peace talks dragged on, but in 1973, the United States and North Vietnam signed the Paris Peace Accords, leading to the withdrawal of U.S. forces. 2 years later, in 1975, Saigon fell to communist forces, marking the end of the war. The Vietnam War left deep scars. Over 58,000 Americans lost their lives, and millions of Vietnamese were killed or displaced. The conflict reshaped American society, fueling skepticism toward government and prompting a re-examination of foreign policy. For Vietnam, the war was a fight for reunification and independence, but at a staggering cost. Today, the legacy of the Vietnam War continues to influence American politics, military strategy, and the nation's collective memory. It remains a powerful reminder of the complexities of international intervention and the profound human cost of war.